All right, let's begin. Hello and welcome everyone to the Ontario Farmland Trust's January winter webinar. We're so happy to have you all here today with us to explore farmland protection and policy. My name is Teresa. I am OFT's Communications and Community Engagement Coordinator. And also here with us working on the back end is Rachel, our Resource Development Manager. And I'll introduce our presenters as we move into our slides. To begin, I did want to start with a land acknowledgement. OFT works across all of Ontario, but we are centered in Guelph on treaty lands and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit of the Anishinaabeg peoples, the original and ongoing protectors of these lands. Guelph resides on Treaty 3 between the Lakes Purchase Territory, representing an agreement and respectful partnership between peoples of different nations. As settler nations work to reconcile our relationships with Indigenous nations, we want our work at the Farmland Trust to reflect the respect deserved to the legacy of the original caretakers, whose stewardship of the land has allowed us to enjoy the land's beauty and bounty today. Especially given that the role of land dispossession has been used as a tool of colonization, this context is really important to acknowledge. Now, throughout the webinar, we encourage participants to share comments in the chat. And if you feel called to, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. It's always really great to see who's here with us today. If you have questions for our speakers, you can submit those using the Q&A feature. And if you have a similar question to one that has already been submitted, you can upvote that question by clicking the thumbs up icon, and this will move the question up in the queue, allowing us to answer the most popular questions first. As I mentioned, Rachel is here to provide support during the webinar. So if you do have any technical issues, you can message her directly using the chat feature. And for those of you who are new to OFT, allow me to introduce us. We are a not-for-profit registered charity and the only provincial-wide conservation organization with a mission dedicated to the protection and preservation of Ontario's agricultural landscapes. I'll let Martin and Margaret share the importance of these agricultural landscapes in their presentation, but I will share what our organization does to accomplish this mission. We have a few main program areas. Our core work is about protecting farmland. We partner with landowners who want to make sure that their land will always stay in farming, whether that's through a farmland easement agreement or by donating their property to OFT. Our first farmland donation occurred in 2024, which is our Bourgeois farm in Tiverton. And with this property, we have a lot of really exciting initiatives taking place, including our farmland access program, a demonstration farm for best management practices, and a community food and farming hub for educational and conservation initiatives and events. We also engage in provincial policy discussions on changing land use policy that impacts farmland. And our education and community engagement programming includes several outreach initiatives that aim to educate the public on what threatens these lands and how we can collectively work to protect them, including webinars like this one and our Farmland Forum coming up in March. Currently, OFT protects 30 properties amounting to over 3,100 acres of farmland, forest, and wetlands across the province. So on this map, you'll see the areas in which we have protected properties, which are the tractors, and then our current easement projects, which are the blue and white dots. We have 11 projects that we're advancing, amounting to over 1,500 acres. And we have an additional 84 landowners interested in protecting their farm with us. I'd also like to mention that it is with the support of our dedicated donors and sponsors that we're able to make such an impact on farmland preservation. And with that, I will begin the webinar today by introducing our speakers. So we have OFT's Executive Director, Martin Straathof, and OFT's Board Chair and Senior Associate at Planscape, Margaret Walton, presenting. I'll give a little introduction of each of them. So Martin grew up on a dairy farm in Renfrew County, shaping his lifelong commitment to agriculture and rural communities. He holds a bachelor's degree in agricultural development and a master's degree in rural planning and development from the University of Guelph, where his research explored how development can support farmland preservation. With his experience in agriculture, nonprofit leadership, and rural planning, Martin is a strong advocate for sustainable agriculture and farmland protection for future generations. Margaret is a senior associate at Planscape, a planning firm specializing in rural recreation and small community planning. With over 30 years of experience, she's a leading expert in agricultural planning, particularly in areas facing urban growth pressures. Margaret has developed agricultural policies for many regions and municipalities across the Greater Golden Horseshoe, promoting a systems-based approach that supports both flexibility and economic success in farming. She's a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners and the Ontario Professional Planners Institute. Margaret and Martin, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I'll now pass it over to you, Tim.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Teresa, for that introduction, and welcome to all of our participants in the webinar today. I want to set the stage by really talking about the agri-food sector itself, and I believe it's really critical to understand the importance of Ontario's agri-food sector, what makes it so unique in Ontario, and then also the pressures it's facing if we're going to properly engage in land use planning that supports this agricultural sector and helps protect farmland. So first and foremost, let's see farmland as the literal foundation of the agri-food sector in Ontario. It is a limited and non-renewable resource, and I can't emphasize that enough. Depending on where you live, though, you might look outside and feel like there's an abundance of farmland all around you. But you have to know that out of all of Canada, only about 5% is suitable as prime agricultural land. And out of that, only 0.5% is class 1, so the best of the best. And of that 0.5%, half of it is found primarily in southwestern Ontario. So this is world-class soil that's in a temperate climate with abundant fresh water. This allows Ontario to produce over 200 diverse commodities, which is incredibly rare for a region to be able to do, and something we really should value more. The agri-food sector contributes over 50 billion to our GDP annually and employs 1 in 9 Ontarians. Not only should we value farmland for providing jobs and economic stability, of course, but we should respect and protect this critical resource that during times of global instability and some uncertainty, our agri-food sector is what ensures that we have food on our plates. Because once farmland is paved over, it's gone. It's gone forever. Ontario has already lost 20% of our farmland over the last 40 years, and the rate of farmland loss is only increasing, and it's under more and more pressure from non-agricultural uses. We can go to the next slide, Teresa. Thank you. Some things to note. In Ontario, we're expecting to see somewhere between 4 to 9 million more people in the next 25 years. So a major priority for the provincial government is to build more homes. There's a housing shortage while the housing sector is also facing its own challenges. So the housing issue is taking precedent over agricultural land use. It creates significant pressure on the ag sector. We've also seen 77 new aggregate licenses in the past 5 years alone, and about 45% of municipal infrastructure requires replacement or repairs. So there's a lot of different pressures that are happening in rural landscapes where prime agricultural areas are located. And the government does have a number of different priorities that they're trying to balance. So provincial priorities can be leading to these kinds of pressures. There's certainly more than just what we have listed here on this slide. But to reiterate, so housing, expanding urban boundaries is going to be needed for new housing, and that equals to more farmland loss. There's infrastructure and energy, both energy generation and storage. And we see a lot more large highway projects like Highway 413 that is impacting farmland. Highways, when they get developed, also attracts large investors that need large acreage. And so that's taking more land out of production as well. So it's a question of how we balance the aspects of what a community needs, including its infrastructure, services, and resources, because infrastructure is incredibly important for communities and can be very effective, but it also often creates unanticipated pressures. So infrastructure and housing development also increases the demand for aggregate extraction, which is, of course, often beneath the farmland. And what you have to understand is that our planning policies, and Margaret will get more into our framework of planning, aggregate trumps everything. If it is prime farmland, we will end up and an aggregate license is approved for that farmland, then we see that taken out of production. All of these also leads to fragmentation of the agricultural system, which is both a historic and ongoing concern. And again, Margaret's going to talk more about fragmentation when she talks about the agricultural system planning. But again, the key takeaway that we have to know is that with all of these pressures and the conversion of agricultural land, once farmland is lost, it's gone forever. With these provincial priorities and pressures to get things done, we've seen a significant number of changes to our land use planning rules or approaches to planning that are going to have significant consequences. For instance, the province removed the growth plan, which led to lowering housing density targets in the GTA and surrounding area. Lower density leads to filling up settlement areas faster, leading to urban settlement boundary expansion sooner than maybe originally anticipated. What was also done away with was the requirement to complete municipal comprehensive reviews for boundary expansion. This review process provided municipalities with an understanding of where to direct settlement boundary expansion to help avoid, minimize, and mitigate the impact of urban boundary expansion onto farmland. Not only that, but boundary expansion can now be applied for by developers at any time now instead of within a planned cycle for review. The province also now restricts third-party appeals from taking place. And this can significantly impact farmers by limiting their ability to challenge nearby development approvals, such as subdivisions or severances, that could negatively impact their operation. And as well, if folks are aware of this, several upper tier municipalities, such as Halton and Peel and York regions, have had their planning authorities stripped. So these upper tier municipalities played a critical role in supporting the agricultural system that crosses municipal boundaries and requires cohesive and comprehensive planning. And again, Margaret's going to touch base on the ag system planning in a moment. All of this matters because it means that there's less structure, faster yet less informed decision making, and greater risk to farmland without the ability for a farmer to appeal. So this means that these changes make community engagement in the planning process, engagement early on in the planning process, all the more critical. And to have effective community engagement, it's helpful to have a better understanding of the planning framework. So this is where I'm going to hand it over to Margaret, who's going to cover some Planning 101 with you.
Thanks, Martin. Yes, so I'm going to do Planning 101, which frankly is a huge topic, but I'll try and synthesize it as best I can with respect to agriculture. So I've been watching people signing in, and I say hello to the people I know, of whom there are many. I see there are quite a few planners. So for some of you, this may be redundant. You probably already know this, but I just thought I'd start because planning, frankly, is a bit confusing and complex. And so we need to understand how the system works together. So, of course, the entire basis of it is the Planning Act, which is the provincial tool for assigning responsibility to municipalities for planning and sort of limiting what they can and cannot do. Section 2 of the Planning Act identifies agriculture as a provincial interest to protect the agricultural resources of the province. And that's sort of the foundation of the policies that the provincial government works from. And how they implement those policies is through the provincial policy statement, which was updated in 2024. And as Martin has indicated, there were some significant changes made in that document, some of which I think will strengthen the tools for protecting agricultural land. Others will weaken it, such as the loss of the comprehensive review process, which was a more comprehensive review as opposed to one-off applications to expand municipal boundaries. The other change was the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe was repealed. So now the provincial plans that are in place are the Greenbelt Plan, the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan, and the Niagara Escarpment Plan. So those will impact the areas which are designated within those documents for additional controls. So that's the provincial context, and then we move into the municipal context. The most important document in planning is the official plan at the municipal level. This is where the policies of the municipality are set. They must be consistent with provincial policy, but they can be more rigorous. So they can't be less rigorous, but they can be more rigorous. So municipalities do have the ability to strengthen some of the controls and use the tools that the province has put in place. The zoning bylaw, which is what most people are familiar with, is really just the tool to implement the official plan. So if you are interested in making a difference in planning, you need to participate in the official plan and the provincial policy part of it as opposed to the zoning bylaw. Once you get to zoning, it's really just how things are going to work on the ground. The other tool that the province has put out is guidance documents on implementing agricultural planning. One of them is minimum distance separation, which deals with livestock operations and how much separation there must be between them and non-agricultural uses. There's also considerable information available, guidance for establishing and implementing the agricultural system, which the province is requiring. And finally, just recently, there have been draft guidelines on doing agricultural impact assessments since 2018. The province has finally finalized those, and they were put in place I just got notice 2 weeks ago. So that's sort of the structure. And then the next tool is the agricultural systems approach. And this is an approach which has been implemented. It was implemented in the growth plan, and really it deals with agriculture in the same way we've always dealt with the natural heritage system. Understanding that you can't just one-off deal with agricultural properties. There's a community of agriculture. Farmers need to have large, contiguous, cohesive areas where there's farm service, where there's other operators, where there's division from non-agricultural uses, and where it's all linked together. And so the two components of the agricultural system are the agricultural land base, and that is mapped and designated in official plans and is protected. And so it used to be, I did a lot of work on implementing the agricultural land use system in the Golden Horseshoe, but now other municipalities are also implementing it. I think it's a great tool. If we can get it in place and then keep it in place and protect any kind of fragmentation. And the Ministry of Agriculture has got a LEAR, which is the tool we use to establish agricultural areas. It's a land evaluation area review, and it identifies agricultural areas as defined in the provincial policy statement. Then those are mapped. In doing a LEAR, you work closely with the agriculture community. It's important for them to be involved in this. The other part of it is the agri-food network. It is not mapped. The province does have an inventory of the components of the agri-food network, which they try to keep up to date. It's a bit challenging, but it is the inputs into agriculture. So the services that farmers need to do their business, and the output, which is how the food gets to the market. So the producers and the processors and so on and so forth. That's the agricultural systems approach, and it's really meant to have a cohesive and broad approach to protecting the agricultural resource. So how the province works with respect to approving planning applications, there is what they call the provincial one-window planning approach. So when a municipality does an official plan, they are required to be consistent with provincial policy, and that plan must be approved by an upper tier agency. So approval rests with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And in doing that approval, it used to be most of the plans, especially across the Greater Golden Horseshoe, were a regional government responsibility. Ministry of Municipal Affairs can delegate approval authority, and often it is delegated to the regional government. With the removal of planning from the regions, it's not, I think the province is doing it, and I know there's a bit of a backlog because, frankly, there's a lot of municipalities who are struggling, who relied on at the upper tiers to help with their planning. So how it works is Municipal Affairs receives the official plans and they circulate to all of the other ministries. So Ministry of Agriculture has a commenting role in this. So they are involved in that respect. They are also a great resource for anyone who's interested. They do a lot of really good work. They have planners on staff, and they are a great resource. And they are very, very much the authors of the agricultural system across Ontario and will help implement that. They also provide guidance to farmers and work with various agencies. So an important ministry, but frankly, a bit of a junior ministry. And at this point in time, housing, transportation, infrastructure, a lot of those things seem to be taking precedent over agriculture. As Martin said, we tend to look at agricultural land and land generally, I think, is sort of something that we have lots of, so it doesn't really matter if we let some of it go for certain uses. So the other tool that actually has been given additional strength in the update of the PPS in 2024 is agricultural impact assessments. And these are tools that will identify the impact. If there is a application to take agricultural land out of production, or if there is an application for a use that could have an impact on agriculture, there's a requirement to do an agricultural impact assessment. And these are to look at, first of all, is the property or the land that's proposed to be taken out of an agricultural designation, is there an alternative where that particular use that's proposed could be located? So that's justification for turning the application down. And if there is no alternative, then it looks at how do you mitigate the impacts and minimize fragmentation and protect the linkages that are in the agricultural system. I've been involved in doing AIAs. They're a relatively new tool, and frankly, I've seen numbers of them that aren't, well, they more of a ticking the box as opposed to an actual analysis, in my opinion, detailed analysis that comes to a result. So it's really important for planners to become comfortable with this tool, but also for us to use it in a rigorous way, because as Martin said, our agricultural land is a limited non-renewable resource. We're losing it at an unsustainable rate, and we need to be very careful when we allow it to go out of production. And certainly look at other things. So, for example, the 413 will take thousands of hectares of Class 1 land out of production, thousands. And they did an AIA, which basically concluded there was no other option, which I will question. But anyway, I don't want to be controversial, but that's sort of my opinion there. The other thing that's really important with AIAs now is, as Martin indicated, there's now no requirement for municipal comprehensive reviews for boundary expansions. So whereas before, every 5 year or whenever a municipality reviewed its official plan, it would look at the growth projections and it would decide where they could expand their urban boundaries if they needed to expand. First of all, if they needed to, and if they did, where was the most appropriate place to avoid, among things, the impact on agricultural land. With the system changing to anybody can apply for an official plan amendment to change boundary expansions at any time, that comprehensive look has been, in my opinion, is gone. So now we're looking at one-offs. And I know there was a question came in earlier about underlying land ownership. I can tell you the majority of the land, especially in the GTA, is optioned or held by, there's interest in it. And so the one tool we have to prevent those options from being exercised in that land going out of production is to hold firm on the designation of it as prime agricultural land with no other use. And allowing to have one-off official plan amendments to expand boundaries here, there, and everywhere weakens the effectiveness of that tool, in my opinion. So moving on to planning applications, just I am aware of time, and this is, as I said, a very large topic. So there's a series of planning applications, and as I said, the one that people should be most aware of is the official plan amendment, and frankly, it is the one that people aren't aware of. Typically, you don't understand what the implications of an official plan are until you go into a planning office to do something, and then you find out that perhaps you should have been involved when the official plan was done. It's the process by which land is designated across a municipality. So once that happens, and it must conform to provincial policy. So once that happens, then the zoning bylaw puts in the nuts and bolts of how that land, what the setbacks are, what the permitted uses are in different zones, So it's the tool that you use to sort of manage the nuts and bolts on the ground development. There is another process that's been introduced in the Planning Act and is becoming increasingly looked at by planners, and that's the community planning permit system. It's a more flexible system, and it basically sets a general context, the official plan, and then the community planning permit system. There's a negotiation on land on how it will be used based on the characteristics of that land. So I know a number of municipalities are working on implementing this system currently. And what it does, the next tool that's listed there is site plan control. It sort of bundles everything together and says it's more appropriate instead of zoning bylaws, which set one set of rules and apply to everybody. So it's trying to put everything into the same box. It says we recognize that all land is not square and flat, and so therefore we need to have some flexibility to negotiate on specific pieces of land. So that's something that's starting to take hold. It is quite a common tool in other parts of Canada. Subdivision and consents. Subdivisions are when you're creating residential use, so we won't talk about that one. But consents to sever is to create a lot less than 5 lots, and that's the one that's the most common in the rural area. And so the one type of consent that was permitted in prime agricultural areas in the past was a surplus farm dwelling. So farming no longer is 100 acres with a house and a barn. It hasn't been for many years. Some of the farmers farm thousands of acres. There's greenhouses, which are on smaller acreages. The fruit and vegetable tend to be on smaller acreages. So farms come in all shapes and sizes. But the reality is farmers do tend to assemble more than one plot of land. And so what they do is they get surplus houses that they don't need or want. They are allowed and have been over time to divide those houses off on a lot and sell them off, because it often is how they fund the purchase of land. There is a provision that if they do that, no other house can be built on the remaining of the property. So it controls it to some extent. It is a bit of an issue because as soon as you introduce a non-agricultural use into an agricultural area, you get conflict, and it makes it difficult. And the one step that was taken recently in the PPS that I am interested in and somewhat discouraged about is the ability to allow 3 residential units on a farm property. So to me, this is going back to what we used to do in the bad old days when we used to do retirement lots. So a farmer who retired could take a lot off the farm and sell the farm with the farmhouse. And over the time, it's the pattern has been that lot gets sold, there's a non-farm use moves in, and conflict occurs. Putting 3 residential units on a property, I expect there will be pressure to sever those houses. It's like night follows day. So I think it's short-sighted to have done that, but it is a reality now. So that's something else that will happen in the area. And minor variances are simply to allow for adjustments where there's an extenuating circumstance on a piece of property that needs to be dealt with. So that's the planning applications. And as I said, the most important one is the official plan amendment. That's where you need to focus and make a difference. So how do planners work? And this is always an interesting one because we as planners are obligated to act in the public interest, regardless of who we are working for. We are not advocates. We do not advocate for our clients, whether they be municipalities or whether they be private sector. I'm a private sector planner. I've worked for many municipalities over my career, but I've also worked for many private landowners. The reality is when you're presented with a planning application, you look at it and determine if it's in the public interest. And if it is not, then planners have to take a stand and say, I'm sorry, I can't support that application. This is very difficult for municipal planners at times. And so they work for a council. And if the politicians have decided they want to go in a particular direction and the planner doesn't agree that is in the best interest of the public, they disagree with their employer. And it can be very challenging for them to stand up. And I know there have been planners in Ontario who've lost their jobs over this, municipal planners. As a private planner, I'm fortunate because when I sit down with a client and I ask them what their goals are, if I don't agree with it and I don't think it's good planning, I just decline to take them as a client. But that's how it works. And so the public interest can be that you need a boundary expansion because you have to accommodate projected growth, so on and so forth. But there is that tool, and it's important to understand what the role of a planner may be. And so finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about engagement and how engagement matters. So, as I talked about, there's that structure with the Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, and then there are the plans. It is really important to engage with the politicians at the provincial level. And as Martin said, we have a very limited non-renewable land base in Canada upon which we can grow food. And we are squandering it at an alarming rate. And we need to take a stand. And I know that a lot of people, when I was a young planner, there were a lot more people who understood how agriculture worked and the importance of the land. And nowadays, it's a much more urban society, and I don't think there's that same understanding. We just can't move north and grow the fruits and vegetables we grow today. We need to protect that. So it's really important for the public to engage, and not just for them to engage, but those of us who do know about this topic, educate the public and make them aware of what it is we're sacrificing with extending infrastructure, roads, highways, subdivisions in the agricultural area. And the one that is really egregious, in my opinion, is logistics centers. Those massive, massive buildings where we're selling and buying stuff is all on Class 1 farmland when you drive along the 401. So we should engage. We need to advocate. We need to educate. The federations of agriculture, there is a federation of agriculture in almost every municipality in Ontario, I believe. Farmers belong to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture or Christian Farmers, and they are supported by good staff at both of those agencies. They should be involved in all decisions that impact agriculture. When an official plan is being put forward, please participate. Please talk to the politicians, make them aware of the concerns. There should be agricultural advisory committees in every municipality so that the agricultural operators have a say in what happens. So I urge you all to participate, be circulated on planning applications. If you register a request to be circulated at a municipality, they are obligated to circulate. So that is my quick and dirty overview of planning in Ontario. It's very complex. I hope I helped some, and I hope I didn't leave anything out that was important. So thanks, Martin, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. Now that Margaret shared the land use planning side of things, there's also an important tool that interacts with land use planning that I want to touch on, but it does operate outside of the planning framework. And that's it's something that landowners can use in collaboration with the Ontario Farmland Trust. And that's a farmland conservation easement. So what you have to know about easements, first, they're voluntary. So it's not forced onto a landowner or to somebody who approaches OFT with an interest of being able to protect their land and use this as a tool to give them agency to be able to protect their farm. They're legally binding agreements. So they are upheld by the courts, giving them a very strong ability to protect farmland. They are permanent in nature in that they are registered on title of the property, so they are there in perpetuity. And once that is all done, OFT becomes responsible for monitoring that property to ensure that no violations are occurring. So these agreements, again, as I mentioned, since they're registered on title, it means that even if the land use designation changes or if the land owner changes, the conservation interest of keeping the land as farmland is protected and ongoing. Farmland easements help provide certainty where policy can change. So while it protects the individual farm that the title is associated with, it also means that the neighboring farms don't need to worry about that farm getting turned into a subdivision or an aggregate pit. So farmers who place easements on their farm are really playing a significant leadership role in their community and do a service for the neighboring farm community. But of course, just one easement isn't going to hold back all the pressures that we were talking about earlier, which is why there's strength in numbers and why OFT is working to establish clusters of farmland easements in communities across the province. So an example of that I'll just talk about briefly is the Stevens property. So this is a great example of a farm we've protected in Durham region, which is home to Wilmot Orchards. Charles and Judy Stevens are the landowners and really exemplify the types of leader that I was just talking about. They are in this area experiencing very high pressures for development, essentially all around them, but there's also some adjacent farms that's also being circulated by development pressures and just off the highway. And as we had talked, highway can bring a lot of pressure for development as well. Their farm and the surrounding farms are made up of primarily Class 1 land. So again, the best of the best. This farm produces quality, nutritious fruit, so blueberries and apples, and that's fruit that's available to the community. This was the first farm in the region that OFT is protected with an easement. And Charles has really become a champion in the community, talking to his neighbors about the initiative that he took to protect the farm and how collectively they can make a difference in protecting the region's prime farmland. Next slide, please, Teresa. I want to say, I'm going to go back actually to the easement piece for a second. I've given hour-long presentations about easements, so you're getting about a 30-second snippet of what an easement is. But if you're interested in finding out more, we do also have other recorded webinars about easements on our website. But this webinar in particular, we really want to frame this as really just being the start for you. It's meant to help get situated to understand the framework in which farmland protection efforts must work within. But there's still lots to learn about how you can get more involved and take action at the community level. So I definitely encourage you all to check out the agenda for our upcoming Farmland Forum in March, and hopefully you can attend. We're focusing on farmland protection at the municipal level, and there's going to be workshops to help you get informed, hear some case studies, and help communities and individuals get organized. Margaret was talking about agricultural impact assessments. There is a special session at the forum about AIAs as well, that for the planners who are ready to learn a little bit more and dive deeper into that session is available. We also think that this topic around the municipality's role in farmland protection is so critical for the Farmland Forum this year, because next year is the municipal election. So it's going to be so important for communities to be equipped to prepare to talk about farmland protection with the candidates, so they are hearing from the voters that this is a serious concern to them. I know that Teresa is going to share a little bit more information about getting more involved with OFT before we end today's webinar. But I just really want to thank Margaret and all of you for attending today's webinar. But I'm going to hand it back over to Teresa now.
Amazing. Thank you both. I'll now open up the floor to any questions you have. We already have a few that have been asked. So one of them is recently our community set an urban boundary that stranded some developers' farmland assets with significant ecological features, including groundwater recharge areas. Those developers are now appealing to the Land Tribunal. Are you aware of any groups involved in negotiations to secure similar natural assets, perhaps through municipal natural assets initiatives or something similar?
So I'm not sure I quite understand what the question was, but there are provisions in the documents about how you balance environment with agricultural land. It's an interesting discussion. I was going to talk a little bit about when I made my presentation, but so Niagara on the Lake, for example, has a series of an irrigation system that runs through the farms. It's a water course. They're water courses that have been there for many, many years, and they are designated as natural features, significant natural heritage features. And so there were setbacks imposed on them initially. And so 30-meter setbacks. And in Niagara on the Lake, the average farm size is less than 50 acres because that is a sustainable farm when you're growing peaches and plums and so on and so forth. So what happened is it would sterilize significant parts of a farm. And so there was a discussion about that. So I think sometimes we need to have those discussions. I'm not sure with source water protection, there certainly are, there's farm management, environmental management plans on farms and so on to deal with those things. But I don't have any specific experience, I don't think, with respect to the particular question.
Another question we have, are there any limits to the number of queries that can be applied in a municipality?
Well, I think so. As Martin said originally, aggregate does trump all. It's aggregate trumps agriculture. So it is extremely difficult to object to a quarry application. That's reality. Um, and the requirements in the PPS are that, and the response you get is that they have to create a rehabilitation plan that at the end of extraction, they will put the property back to the same level of production as when they started. Reality is those operations go on for years and years and years. And I know of very few examples where there has been reasonable rehabilitation. And frankly, what happens is that so many of the quarries that exist don't even have rehabilitation plans because they predated the requirement. But I don't know that there are limits in municipalities, and municipalities, frankly, um, they don't have as much control over quarry applications. The province really trumps it all, and there's a need for aggregate. It's been identified as a critical resource, and so it's difficult for municipalities to go against provincial policy. So I don't know of, I know there are some municipalities who have success. Caledon had a successful application. And they went to it was Ontario Municipal Board at the time, and the application for the quarry was turned down. But I think that's a rare instance that I know of.
Another one, our local Federation of Agriculture has requested that the upper tier circulate them on the severance applications, and they have refused, citing that the Federation of Agriculture are not listed in the Act as a mandatory agency. Do you have any suggestions on how a lower tier or lower level municipality can help them, or do you have a resource that I can share with them?
Well, maybe I'm missing something, but typically, if you file a request to be circulated on applications, you get that circulation. So I'm not sure why that would be an issue because a mandatory agency, I mean, that's one thing, but people can request to be put on the list. You don't have to be a mandatory agency to get notice. And so, and if it's an issue, I would suggest the federation should go to the politicians and ask, why not? And, as I said in my remarks, they should, agricultural impact or advisory committees should be all municipalities should have them. And there should be a good relationship between politicians and farmers. And I guess I would look into that a little more closely because I don't think they can deny it.
Are conservation easements protected from government expropriation?
So, unfortunately, expropriation is the one thing that can undermine conservation easement and its permanence. So, while we haven't seen that take place in Ontario, we've seen some examples in the US that we've followed closely. We are aware of some plans for expropriation where they ended up avoiding lands that had easements on it. Particularly, those properties were deemed ecologically sensitive through the Ecological Gifts Program, which is a federal tax incentive program for landowners to protect their properties. We find that having eco gifts involved in our conservation easements does add an extra layer of strength to the protection because now you also have a federal agency that's interested and has a vested interest in seeing that land protected. But ultimately, at the end of the day, expropriation could undermine that easement.
Should the Agricultural Advisory Committee that you suggested be formed as a committee of council or through another group like a local branch of the OFA?
My experience is it should be not a committee of council, which would indicate that it would be comprised of councillors. But there should be a councillor representative on it. But I think it should be comprised of farmers from the community.
I will just add, I know of a report that was done that was looking at essentially recognizing the value of agriculture advisory committees. And so I will share a link to that report in the chat for folks who are interested and would like that as a resource if they're exploring advocating or getting an agriculture advisory committee set up within their municipalities.
That's great. Is it possible / how easy is it to discharge an easement? For example, if farmer A registers an easement and then sells a property to landowner B, can the easement be discharged by landowner B?
Sorry, I'm following that question again. Is it possible
So,
how easy it is to discharge? So once the easement holder is the land trust. So the land trust has both its legal responsibility and vested interest to maintain the easement with conservation interest. So a new landowner coming in can't just say, I want that easement gone. Even if for some reason the easement holder and the landowner are saying the easement would be discharged, you officially have to get approval from the Ministry of Natural Resources to be able to have that easement removed. So there are multiple layers and safeguards in place that would prevent that. And I don't know of a conservation organization whose mandate would be to make sure that their properties are ongoing or protected in perpetuity that would allow something like that. So a discharge can't just happen on the whim of a new landowner.
do you want to comment on land search for a new radar system in Simcoe County, given all the land Camp Borden owns?
It's certainly, we've had inquiries with respect to that. And we're aware of the issue and we're monitoring it and working with landowners in the area. It is as Martin said, expropriation is a tool. I would hope, I know there's been a lot of action from the landowners in the area and concern, and I would hope the government would listen. And you're right, they do have a lot of land, so perhaps this will they can negotiate it out. But we have been involved, but I mean, ultimately, I think if the government decides absolutely that's where it's going to go, but I think there's a long way to go before that, and hopefully some compromise can be realized.
With the new AIA guidance being published, do you think that it goes further than LEAR, LEAR, or provides additional parameters for LEAR, or are they two separate spaces?
They're definitely not two separate spaces because they should work together. And I'm glad you brought this question up because I want to follow up on it. The LEAR process is a process that was developed using the Canada Land Inventory. And the Canada Land Inventory ranks land from class 1 to class 7, with the top three classes, 1, 2, and 3 being prime land, which is realistic for field crops. But when you come to other types of agriculture, it's not necessarily the best tool. For example, the mucklands that make up the Holland Marsh are class 7. Like they would not qualify under the LEAR process. And the other one that is important, and this is a really important issue as well, is grasslands, which are often for livestock. And in Ontario, it's becoming increasingly difficult for livestock operators because, as I said, there's a mandatory requirement for separation on livestock operations, which, as I said, is on the farmer's property. It's the only setback I know of under the Planning Act where the setback is on the neighbor's property and not the developer's property, which I think is grossly unfair. But also the fact that they need to have a certain acreage in order to grow feed so that it's economically viable. So a lot of the lands where livestock is viable, it also would not be caught up in the LEAR. So you have to be able to be flexible and look at other tools. And one positive thing with the PPS this time. There's a category called specialty crop lands. The specialty crop lands that caught the Holland Marsh because it catches muck farming. And it's the fruit and the tender fruit lands in Niagara were the two that the province had created. And now I know there are a couple other that have been created by municipalities. It used to be that the requirement under the PPS was that you could not create, if you wanted to create a specialty crop area, you had to use a provincially established protocol for doing so. And the province never created the protocol. So I was involved in applications where we tried to create a specialty crop designation, and we couldn't because we couldn't meet the test in the PPS because the province didn't have the tools we needed. They didn't do the protocol. In the last iteration of the PPS in 2024, they've updated that decision or that definition of specialty crop. So you now only have to work with the province through a process. So there's a lot more flexibility for municipalities who have somewhat unique agriculture, which may not be based on the CLI. The value of the land may be in another feature. You can create that specialty crop designation, which is the most rigorous presentation. It's the most rigorous protection on land. And actually, specialty crop areas that's one place where aggregate cannot prevail. So there are tools, and yes, the LEAR is just one tool. There are others. And that's one of the things that needs to be explored and implemented through the AIA.
And we
And
have one.
also through the process, the official plan process, when you're designating your land, that's why you need to involve farmers because they will tell you. Often in the agricultural system, because the linkages are formed, they may be rural land, they may be lower class land. So an agricultural area is not all just one class one, two, and three. It's a whole variety of circumstances that combine to make that the area that should be a prime agriculture, that is a prime agricultural area and should be subject to a higher level of protection.
Our final question, how are farmland conservation easements integrated with conservation easements for natural heritage features, wetlands, woodlands, along with prime ag soil? Is one easement used on a property or both applied in separate areas of the property?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we are completing a conservation easement, we are identifying the agricultural features as well as the natural features. So we can protect the natural features, forests, wetlands, waterways, etc., to ensure that those the ecological integrity of that feature of the land is also protected. So there's, again, a couple of different ways that we can do that and structure that within an easement. But essentially, yes, we are recognizing. So when we're talking about farmland, farmland is made up of both agricultural landscapes as well as natural landscapes, including then the areas like a farmstead or the building cluster areas as well. So farmland is complex and made up of a variety of different features, which we protect.
And
I did
Teresa,
also.
oh,
Oh,
sorry, Martin.
I was just going to say, I did see one other question just in the chat pertaining to easements and tax benefits for conservation easements. Landowners do receive a charitable tax receipt for putting a conservation easement on the property. Again, I go into a lot more detail about this in our easement presentations because there's a lot of nuances to that. But there's also I was mentioning the ecological gifts program earlier. So that's the enhanced federal tax incentive program that also waives capital gains and extends the life of the tax receipt for up to 10 years instead of just 5 years like a normal charitable tax receipt would. So there are certainly opportunities to have some tax benefit.
And if I could just say, Teresa, there were a few questions that were submitted ahead of time, so if I can just quickly review those.
Yeah.
One was what happens when a lot of the underlying property is optioned by developers. That's reality. It happens all the time. And we need to have planning controls in place that no matter, they don't have any right to develop that land because they decide not to farm it. You have to be very vigilant to not allow the developer goes in, purchases the land, the barn falls down, the fences are gone, they don't tile drain, they don't maintain the land. That's not an excuse. It's still farmland. So they shouldn't be allowed to set up the circumstances where they can argue it's no longer viable because they have made it so. So farmland can always be brought back into production with the right people doing it. The other one was the question about greenhouses. It's a tricky one. It always comes up. And why should you allow greenhouses on Class 1 land? And reality is some of those greenhouses use that soil. So the Class 1 land is important to them. But also, you have to be careful not to interfere too much in how farmers operate their properties. And so greenhouses are an essential part, and actually we have an incredibly successful greenhouse operation sector in Ontario. And so I think you put those protections in place, and then you don't tell the farmer how he can farm or what he can grow. So within the definition, there's a very well-established and carefully thought out definition of what agriculture is. And if you fit within that definition, whether you're a greenhouse or not, then you are in agriculture. And I think that that's as far as we want to go with that. And I think that may have been all the questions. I hope we got. Oh, edge planning. Edge planning, there's all kinds of work done on edge planning, trying to separate buffer between two uses. So I'd encourage, I know and Halton, Peel's done some good work on edge planning. Halton's done good work on edge planning, other planners. So follow up on that and you'll find it. And yes, to answer your question that you just came up with, OFA and Martin is very good at, we connect with municipalities, we offer webinars, and we're very happy to assist in any way we can in educating about agriculture, how it works, and what municipalities and everyone can do to support it. So thank you.
All right, thank you both, and thank you everyone for participating with your questions. It's really great to see that engagement. I'll just conclude the webinar. So if you enjoyed this webinar, please consider donating to OFT using the link in the chat so we can continue offering these webinars and other accessible resources. I'll also invite you to take a moment to fill out our webinar feedback form to help the ongoing improvement of our webinar offerings. Your responses will be anonymous. And lastly, if you would like to get more involved with OFT or learn more about our farmland protection resources, please visit our website, ontariofarmlandtrust.ca. You can stay up to date with our work by following us on social media, as well as subscribing to our newsletter. And you can become a member, you can volunteer your time to help accelerate our farmland protection initiatives. That's everything that I have. Thank you all once again for joining us today. You'll receive a link to the recording shortly. Thank you, Margaret and Martin. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.